Everyone. I'd like to call to order the regular City Council meeting for Monday, October 5th, 2020. It's a virtual meeting and it is now 8 p.m. If we could at this time, would everyone please join me in saying a Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the
republic for which
it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with
liberty and justice for all.
Hey, thank you. And one more time for the record, City Clerk, do we have a quorum?
Yes, Mayor, we do have a quorum.
Okay. At this time, I will entertain any motions for changes to the agenda, either additions, deletions, or amendments at this time. Hearing none, we will move on to citizen participation. Do we have any this evening, City Clerk?
Yes, Mayor, we did receive 3 comments for this evening. So I'll go ahead and read the first one. Just one moment. Okay. Good evening, Mayor Adams, City Council, City staff, and citizens of Bowie. I am writing regarding the special task force that was created for the ice arena. First and foremost, I would like to inform everyone that I applied to be a member of that task force. I believe as the chair of the CRC, it is an opportunity for me to work directly with a group of individuals in our city as it pertains to recreation. I need to state empathetically that I have never opposed anything that will make our city diverse and that is a benefit to our children. I believe that an idle mind is the devil's workshop, and we must offer a range of activities for our youth. As a mom and a teacher, children have and will always come first to me. I am also confused as to why individuals were not encouraged to join the CRC and have a discussion with its members and the staff liaison to eliminate unnecessary steps that are being taken now regarding this concern. If we are ever going to be on one accord as a city, it is imperative that we stop systematic isolation. We have to learn to have uncomfortable conversations around different people who may not understand. It is our duty to educate individuals while working collaboratively to build a stronger city, to be a better Bowie. It is not too late to rethink this idea and encourage individuals to sit at the table with a city committee that was formed to handle and address recreation in our city. If not, I am hoping this task force will include individuals that just have the city's best interests at heart. Thank you, Carrie Bridges. Okay. Next one. Good evening, council members. My name is Steve Rohrenberger, a 30-year Bowie resident and the chair of your Environmental Advisory Committee. I'd like to make a brief statement in support of an item in this evening's consent agenda, proclaiming Energy Efficiency Month in the city of Bowie. I would also like to use that proclamation to connect a few dots. Energy Efficiency Month is a nationwide effort to mobilize citizen actions to become more energy efficient, reduce greenhouse gas emissions, save money, and create a healthier environment in which we and our grandchildren can survive and thrive. We have joined this effort by proclamation for the past 4 years. This year is special because it marks the 50th anniversary of Earth Day, which the council resolved in resolution R920 to celebrate with a year of activities and events. The pandemic put a hold on our plans, but Councilman Wolfley suggested an extension at the last council meeting so the EAC, Green Team, and city staff are ready to relaunch that effort whenever possible. This year, you also approved a new 5-year climate action plan, resolving to reduce emissions and the footprint of the city by 50% by 2030. This supports similar county, region, and state commitments. After all, we are all in this together. A recent example of Bowie's commitment is the purchase of 3 additional electric vehicles, installation of 4 charging stations behind City Hall, and a recent agreement to install additional public charging stations at City Hall and at the Kent Hill Center. To celebrate Energy Efficiency Month, the EAC and the city staff have planned a dedicated social media campaign full of tips and tricks to help residents be more energy efficient and learn about green programs offered in the city. Many of these tips are from the 100 Acts of Green created for Earth Year and the Climate Action Plan. As a Bowie citizen, I want to thank the council and city staff for these and related efforts and congratulate everyone involved for their commitment to a more sustainable city. On behalf of all residents, I encourage your continued support for the environment. Interested residents can visit www.cityofbowie.org/greenbowie for more information. Okay. And the last one is from John Teasdale, the Vice Chair of the Environmental Advisory Committee. Climate change is the biggest environmental challenge of this century. To meet this challenge, the City of Bowie recently approved a climate action plan that provides a playbook for reducing greenhouse gas emissions over the next 5 years and establishes a target for reducing emissions by 50% by 2030. The current City of Bowie Development Review Guidelines and Policies does not mention climate change. It does a good job of identifying the need for protecting sensitive watersheds, preserving open space and tree canopy cover, and promoting native species, but there is no mention of the necessity for reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Most of the major categories addressed when considering development, including land use, housing standards, transportation, and urban design, have a profound impact on greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. Maintenance of tree cover not only protects local watersheds, but also is an important mechanism for capturing atmospheric carbon. Population densification in already developed urban centers can mitigate against climate change compared to suburban sprawl into undeveloped areas. High standards for energy efficiency in residential and commercial buildings can significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Multimodal transportation planning that includes options for pedestrians and bikers as well as improved mass transit will play an important role in addressing climate change. Establishing infrastructure for electric vehicles provides an important incentive for transitioning to a carbon-free transportation system. Therefore, given the critical role that almost all development decisions can have on climate change, this message is a reminder to Council that the Climate Action Plan can be an important framework to inform development policies. I recommend that climate change should be a critical criteria for evaluating all development projects in the City of Bowie. Ask yourselves, to what degree will each development decision improve, maintain, or degrade the climate? Thank you. And that's all of the comments, Mayor.
Thank you, City. As I look at this, I see no presentations for this evening. Is that correct?
Correct.
And we move on to city boards and committees. Any reports from any city boards or committees this evening?
No, sir.
Okay. We will now move on to council announcements. Any members? I will recognize council member at large, Ingrid Harrison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have a couple of brief announcements. I want to remind everyone that the census deadline has been extended to October 31st. And as of September 30th, Prince George's County Census self-response rate is 69.4%, which is exceeding the 2010 rate and pushing towards 70%. We want to get that up. The City of Bowie is definitely in a plus 70 plus range, but we certainly want to continue to move that number up. So if you haven't filled out your census, please do so and encourage your neighbors to do the same. I also want to remind you to, you should have all or should be receiving your ballot to vote. And if you haven't received it yet, it should be coming soon. You can also request a mail-in ballot if you want to vote by mail. And reminder that you have to complete the ballot application, return it in the prepaid envelope, and it must be received by October 20th. So if you've already done that, you should start receiving your ballot, and please fill that out as soon as possible. I want to remind you that voter registration deadline is October 13th by 5 p.m. Same day registration is permitted during early voting and on election day. And your request for a mail-in ballot application must be received by October 20th, 2020. So early voting starts October 26th and goes through November 2nd. All sites will be open from 7 to 8 p.m. And election day voting in person is on November 3rd from 7 to 8 p.m. as well. Please get out and vote. Also, I want to say thank you to all the residents and all the volunteers and staff who came and generously volunteered and donated to the joint donation drop-off for the food drive at the Bowie Interfaith Food Pantry we held yesterday. Special thank you to, again, the staff and the volunteers who came out. I want to say thank you to Senator Doug Peters, Delegates Ron Watson, Geraldine Valentino-Smith, County Council Chairman Todd Turner, Mayor Adams, and members of the council that were there. I want to say a sincere thank you to Delegate Valentino-Smith for her efforts in coordinating the effort. It was a very successful event. And thank you to all the residents who came out and donated. Your generous efforts were greatly appreciated. One last thing, please join the Prince George's County Planning Department's Community Chat Series, which is focusing on the Bowie-Mitchellville Vicinity Master Plan. And the chats continue. I think we have like 4 more. There's one tomorrow night, Tuesday, October 6th. And that starts at 7 p.m. And the focus will be economic prosperity. So you can go to the city's website and click on the registration link to register for those chats. And you will receive an email with the link. And that's all I have, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman. Appreciate that. Is there any other council member who'd like to, who has any announcements at this time? Hearing none, I would just like to echo what Councilwoman Harrison just said. We have got to make sure that if you know anyone or if you haven't done it yourself, that you fill out your census form. I think it's also very important, as you stated, that you remember to vote. And last but not least, as we talked about a little earlier, thank you again, as the Councilwoman said, to all the volunteers, staff, all of the elected officials, and all of those who participated in that food drive yesterday. That is so important, and I think it just shows the character of the city of Bowie and how we care for each other and how we care for our neighbors and the generosity that we have. So thank you all as well. Having said that, we will now move on to City Manager's report.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor and City Council. I have no report this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, City Manager. From there, we will move on to the consent agenda. Item A is approval of Proclamation P1120, proclaiming October 2020 as Energy Efficiency Month in the City of Bowie. Item B is approval of Resolution R7120, awarding a contract for HVAC modification at the Bowie Senior Center. Item C is approval of Resolution R7420, accepting bid for the residing of the upper and lower salt barns at the Public Works Facility. Item D is approval of Resolution R7520 regarding variance application BV-1-20. And item E is approval of Resolution R76-20, accepting bid proposal for maintenance of roadside drainage swales resolution R76-20, accepting bid proposal from. And then we have approval of item F. I think that should be approval of resolution R73-20, declaring Black Lives Matter and advancing racial and intersectional equity. At this time, I'll accept a motion.
Mr. Mayor, point of clarification, item F is on old business, I believe.
That's correct.
You're absolutely correct. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I move for approval of the consent agenda.
I second.
It's been moved and properly second. Any discussion at this time? Hearing none. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed have the same. Hearing none.
Aye.
Carries. Okay, moving on to old business. Approval of resolution R73-20, declaring Black Lives Matter and advancing racial and intersectional equity. Any comments? Having no comments, any questions? Hearing none. I would ask at this time if we are going to approve.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I would like to move to vote in the affirmative on resolution R-73-20.
I second.
It's been moved and properly second. Any discussion at this time? Hearing none, we'll call for the vote. All in favor, please respond with an aye.
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 Aye. All opposed, same favor. Hearing none, the motion carries. Moving on to new business, the city development policies. I will turn the mic over to the floor to Joe Minard with city staff.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council members. I'm Joe Minard, the city's planning director, and tonight is the second meeting at which we're discussing the city council's development policies. At the previous meeting, we discussed land use policies and economic prosperity. We didn't really get to focus too much on the economic prosperity, but I think there's a lot of overlap with the land use policies. We talked about concentration of commercial development within the Bowie local center, and those things are reiterated under economic prosperity. So if there are any questions about that, I'd be happy to talk about economic prosperity tonight or at any other time. But really the focus on tonight's meeting is on transportation and mobility policies, as well as the natural environment. And like I had mentioned to you at the last meeting, I'm reviewing these policies because they are the evolution of city council policy over decades of time. And we've captured these into one document, and we do use them on a regular basis when talking to developers about development projects. And the purpose of the review is, number one, it's in our objectives from the budget this year to review these with you, and also to prepare for the upcoming Bowie and Vicinity Master Plan update, which will be published probably this time next year. And so we wanted to give council a chance to look at the policies, what they say, give us your perspective on them. If there's any suggestions that you might have to reorient the policies or make any other changes, this would be the opportunity to do that. So what I'd like to do is put up on the screen the transportation and mobility policies. If I could just share my screen. Can you see that, Mayor?
No.
Okay, can everyone?
Not yet, Joe. Now I can.
Okay.
It's there.
All right, thank you. What I'd like to do is move through this section rather together quickly just to highlight this, how it's set up and the subjects that it covers. And if necessary, we can go into any questions that you might have. At the beginning of the document section, we just have an overall section. It gives the vision for transportation and mobility in italics as kind of the lead into the section. The first series of policies deal with a regional approach to transportation with a focus on multimodal approaches, which is providing all modes of transportation, not just roads, but rail, bus, bicycling, and walking. And so that's been the council's policy for many years. Also, to support the study of new ways to fund transportation modes, you have things like advanced protection for right-of-ways, for not only for highways, but for transit lines. And I'm sure you've heard about public-private partnerships, those types of funding alternatives. And then the third one there is regarding a council policy about eventually constructing a new roadway, which would link Maryland Route 197 north of Bowie State University across the Patuxent River with Maryland Route 3 in Anne Arundel County. And that's been the council policy for a long time. And the purpose of that was to keep the traffic off of Racetrack Road coming from the Crofton area. There's quite a bit of traffic that comes down Route 3 and then uses Maryland 450 over to Racetrack Road and then going north to Laurel. And this idea of having a new roadway, which would probably be a state roadway, connecting Anne Arundel into Maryland Route 197 would alleviate the traffic coming through the city. The next section of policies deals with bikes, trails, and pedestrians. And we did get a suggestion last time we updated the guidelines in 2017 to really focus more on bikes, trails, and pedestrians. So one of the things we did was put this as one of the first sections in the transportation and mobility section because of its importance to the public. And so we talk about bike trail signage, and we have installed signage throughout the city on the shared routes within the city. And council's aware we now have a trails master plan, which provides us a lot of guidance in this area. Policy number 5 there is to look at examining a new trail within the alignment of what was called PT1, which was a public transit way in the old master plan that came out from Largo out to the Bowie Town Center. And a lot of the right-of-way has been reserved and is in public ownership. And we would suggest here in this policy that connecting Church Road over to Northview Drive would have some merit because it would connect those residential areas in the Church Road corridor into the Bowie local center. And so that's currently council's policy. There are other policies here that deal with trails like the WBNA trail, providing rest areas and other amenities along the trail system. Also, the Bowie Heritage Trail would be covered by number 8, which is up in the Old Town Bowie area. Actually being able to provide a trail from the Tanglewood Park area on Zug Road using Chestnut Avenue to get up to the Knights of St. John trailhead at 12th Street. So that's a specific trail recommendation. Also finding another way to cross US 50 between the Melford development and Governor Bridge Road is something that could be evaluated. And I know our trails plan picked up on that, and there is a recommendation in there, and Park and Planning is planning that as well. Possibly an underpass of US 50 along the Patuxent River would accomplish that. A couple of these other policies deal with providing right-of-way and including the former A44 right-of-way, which is the former intercounty connector. In 2 master plans ago, the Bowie master plan had actually set aside areas for the outer beltway or the intercounty connector, whatever you want to call that road. And the 2006 master plan eliminated that from the transportation network in our planning areas. So the right-of-way is available. A lot of it is owned by the county government, in some cases owned by city government. And so we'd like to try to see using that north-south route to be able to create preservation for wildlife corridors, and also creating a new trail amenity that would connect city neighborhoods. And that is something that we are recommending also through our Trails Master Plan. Also looking at making it possible for residents to walk or bike anywhere in the city. We did receive quite a bit of feedback during the 2017 update from the bicyclist community, and we did provide more detail on these policies, and this is one of those policies that got upgraded, so to speak, as a result of the last review. There's a policy that council has about transit. It's rather general in nature, really encouraging better transit options for residents and doing what we can to make the amenities a little bit better within the city, and also advocating for on-demand transit service and paratransit for city residents. And I think this is one of those policies that, because of its general nature and because of its age, probably could be further amplified in any revision going forward. And council does have a more detailed policy that you write in the annual transportation letter that's sent to the state transportation secretary and also the county executive. And you've spelled out what your policies are regarding transit. So that's one that we could make revisions to. This next section deals with future road expansion, and it's been council's policy over the years to really limit future road expansions, and in many cases such that only a maximum of 4 lanes should be provided, and that the area should grow and develop based on the transportation network that doesn't exceed the 4 lanes maximum, except for US 50, Maryland 214, US 301, and the portion of Mitchellville Road north of Northview Drive. So council has opposed the upgrading of other roadways to beyond 4 lanes. So that's basically the essence of that section dealing with future road expansions. And then going to the next sections, we're dealing with specific roads, and council has adopted position statements regarding specific roadway projects. There's the policy regarding Maryland 197 and the design that should be adhered to in the planning for that roadway between Kent Hill Drive and Maryland Route 450. And these positions were taken as a result of public hearings that council held on the road designs, and this is what was officially submitted to the state. Same thing with Maryland Route 450, and we talked a little bit about this at the last meeting in the Main Street area, where it could be suggested to the state that maybe they should go back and reconsider the plan that they've come up with to be more friendly to a Main Street design along the area between, say, Stony Brook Drive and Racetrack Road, which would allow for more compatible development and more urban type amenities along the streetscape there, and on-street, such as on-street parking and the things that we discussed at the last meeting. So I think it would be a good suggestion for council to pick up on that if you feel strongly about it, and write a letter to the state asking them to at least examine that part of the Route 450 project down in the Bowie Main Street area. We have the 301 policy, and again, this was taken as a result of the design review that was done many years ago, probably 15 years ago, with the interchange at Maryland Route 197 and US 301. So there's some parameters there that council had recommended, including frontage roads on the east side and west sides of US 301, and also grade separated interchange to provide reasonable alternative paths for bicycle access through the interchanges. Similarly, Maryland Route 3 had its own design and engineering study, or project planning study, excuse me. And council adopted a similar set of guidelines for how that roadway should be upgraded. And again, that's a project we haven't talked about in a long time, but it affects how Route 450 in Bowie connects over to Route 450 in Crofton, and the design that council supported, which was alternate 3, would provide a continuous access from the Route 450 in Prince George's County to the Route 450 in Anne Arundel without people having to actually drive on Route 3. It would actually be a separated, elevated roadway. And I don't know that the state's ever going to come up with the money to construct such a large improvement, but it has gone through the preliminary planning and council has this position statement. One other long-standing policy of the cities has been a new interchange at US 50 and Maryland Route 193. And the purpose of that was to alleviate the traffic that actually occurs on Maryland 197 between US 50 and 450, Maryland 450, because if the roadway was limited to 4 lanes on Route 197, there would need to be some relief provided along Route 50 to allow traffic to get off at a different location. And so council settled on the idea of an interchange at, you can see in number 25 there, a specific recommendation for an interchange at US 50 and Maryland 193, and then suggesting some design improvements for Maryland Route 193 to a multi-lane divided roadway. Council also has transportation policies regarding rural and scenic roads, and we talked at the last meeting about those primarily being located east of US 301. There is a list of scenic roads that the county has in the Master Plan of Transportation, and development is supposed to follow the rural design standards rather than the suburban design standards. So you have such things as open section streets, and then also trying to have bicycle access, safe access along those roads. And then the final section of transportation and mobility deals with traffic management techniques. And this is where we've captured things like traffic calming to slow traffic speeds where speeding has been documented as a problem. Also recommending the state-of-the-art technological devices such as speed cameras. Also trying to come up with an interjurisdictional corridor congestion management system in corridors such as the Route 301 and Route 3 corridor. And then also council was specifically concerned about access from subdivisions directly onto Church Road. And the idea was that you would not be allowed to have shared driveways or individual driveways along Church Road. And so that would conclude the transportation policies. And Mayor, I could continue on or I could answer questions, whichever you would like.
Let me just go through. I have a couple of quick questions, but I can hold on. If council are willing to just move on, I think we can just do that at this time, unless I have something that needs to be addressed immediately. Hearing nothing, why don't you go ahead, Joe, and continue.
Okay, the next section is dealing with the natural environment. And we did get a lot of input in the 2017 update from some of our environmental advisory committee members and really helped to strengthen this section. And the wording of what you see here is a result of, council taking those concerns into consideration when you approve the last set of policies. And so this section starts with overall policies for the environment that really talk about preserving and creating green space as well as habitat corridors and just the general approach to preservation and enhancement for the benefit of city residents and future generations. So that's a broad overarching policy, number one. Council has always had policies supporting protection of the Patuxent River and the Chesapeake Bay. So those are policies 2 and 3. There was a suggestion in the last update that we also focus and organize our policies for preservation. So number 4 deals with the Beltwoods natural area on Church Road, protection of open space generally where you have sensitive areas. The larger lot zones that we talked about at the last meeting should be expanded wherever possible to protect environmentally sensitive areas. So that's using the zoning ordinance as a tool. and then preservation and protection of stream valleys and tracts of land with pristine environmental characteristics, and also to try to create greenways are primary objectives. Policy number 8 deals with woodland and water conservation, and this really goes into some of the values of trees as they support habitat and different types of flora and fauna, and what trees actually do to benefit the environment. And there's a linkage to the Woodland Conservation Ordinance of the county here, so we do see this on every development project that comes through. So this is the council's policy with respect to woodland and water conservation. Policy 9 is also similar to that. It's water conservation techniques, conservation landscaping encouraged in all new development projects. Things such as reusing harvested rainwater for irrigation is encouraged. And then the next section deals with sustainable actions. And again, this was right around the time the sustainability plan was being developed. And so there's much more in the sustainability plan itself that speaks to specific items. But, you know, the first one there, number 10, talks about broad-based public education and awareness programs. And that's pretty much what we are doing with our sustainability plan, focusing on protecting and preserving the Chesapeake Bay and its tributaries. We have a lot of sub-watersheds that occur in Bowie, and as council is aware, we have some programs and volunteer efforts that are geared towards preserving those areas. And then council also supported the use of native and non-invasive plants by residents and businesses in the development community in providing better landscaping on development sites. And so we're endorsing the Bayscapes technique, and which is a regionally sound landscape program promoted by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So our environmental advisory committee, I know, is very committed to trying to improve the public spaces in the city, and you've seen some of the planting projects that they've been involved with, the pollinators and pollinator gardens and things like that. So that's in line with this policy. And then finally, the development, number 12 is that development proposals are encouraged to incorporate green building and environmental design techniques to the fullest extent possible. And it's really our green building policy to encourage new development to follow the city's example into the construction of City Hall to be an environmentally conscious design in the building design. So those are the policies that we have for the natural environment. Again, we got a lot of good input at the last round in 2017 from the Environmental Advisory Committee, and we're at this point, Mayor, I'm happy to answer any questions council may have.
Okay, and if council doesn't mind, on just a couple of quick ones for me, Joe. Can we take a look at what city staff might do? I know you mentioned the possible rewrite under the Maryland 197 policy. I think that was item number 21, the 450 policy. Can we take a look at how we might want to revisit that?
Right, we can certainly come up with some language for you at the next meeting when we're in the wrap up, when we're providing suggestions for going forward, and in the new public hearing draft that would come out, we could address the direction that council wants to go. I think we're all on the same page with respect to the Main Street area. And I think separately, what would be beneficial would be to actually write an independent letter to the State Highway Administration or to the Secretary of Transportation asking for a re-examination of the project. It's been through design or through preliminary planning, as I mentioned, but there's no money set aside for design or engineering. And so before they get to that point, I think we would want them to consider revising their plans for this portion of the project.
Okay, and one other really quick question I have, and actually, Joe, you may be able to answer this, or maybe even the city attorney. When it comes to the use of the technological devices, and we've talked about speed cameras and other things of what we as a city can do as individual jurisdictions as opposed to having to go to the state to do that. Has there been any change on that? I believe it was MML was looking, and I'm looking at item number 28 under traffic management techniques. I'm jumping around a little bit on you there, but do you know our city attorney, has there been any change? I know at one point, I think we were trying to look through the legislature to be able to have individual cities or municipalities make those decisions for themselves. Has anything changed with that?
Nothing has changed. Are you asking what is the scope of the city's ability to place cameras with respect to speed or red lights?
Okay, so we still have to go through the state and they have to authorize it?
No, the state has authorized you under certain circumstances to use both red light cameras and speed cameras.
Okay.
But
Thank you.
the circumstances under which you can place those cameras are limited or restricted. So, for example, speed cameras can only be used in school zones and work zones, and you don't have any work zone areas under your authority, so you're limited to school zones with respect to speed cameras. Red light cameras you can pretty much place anywhere on traffic lights that are under your jurisdiction.
Right. And I was thinking that at one point, I thought that MML was really talking to the state about allowing municipalities, instead of having to go get exemptions for every time a municipality, somebody wanted a speed camera outside of just the school zones, that they would allow that. So I take it that's.
Oh, no, and I don't know that there's even any process for anybody to get an exemption to put them outside of speed zones. The law is different in Montgomery County. They do have cameras that are not limited to school zones, but other than that, I believe everybody's restricted and that there is no process to get an exemption.
Okay. Hey, thank you so very much. I'd like to entertain if there are any other council members have any questions. I think I'll go through the process of Councilwoman Harrison at large.
No, Mr. Mayor, you all have addressed you actually asked the same questions that I had. So I got the answers that I needed. So thank you.
All right. Thank you. Council member at large, Henri Gardner.
No, Mr. Mayor, I actually have no questions at this time either.
Okay. I'll go to District 1. Michael Esteve.
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. So actually I have a couple things. Some of them are questions that we received from constituents just today. And I have a little list that I went to the trouble of typing, and now I cannot find it. So here we go. So a few quick things. For 197 and 450, Joe, you kind of touched on this. I'm sorry, Mr. Minor, you kind of touched on this. In the long term, I think there's a lot of agreement that in spite of previous attempts to try to get 450 expanded, particularly at the section that runs through the Jesuit property, I'm seeing much more both consensus from residents with an interest in this issue, and also just a lot of very compelling literature that emphasizes that in order to have a successful Main Street, it's important to avoid having a Strode, which is definitionally what I think we all agree we have now. And so very much on board with the long-term plans to make 450 as it runs through the business area, to turn that into a slower paced road with on-street parking, to encourage the inevitable future redevelopments of at least Free State and some of the other parcels along there, to encourage the redevelopment of those parcels in such a way that there are businesses immediately on the road, to actually turn it into a genuine Main Street, which will involve essentially slowing it down. So that was one quick thing. Let's see. Some of these were actually already addressed, which is great. Oh, also related to 450, walkability and safe pedestrian and bike crossing is also very important. I received several comments about this. Irrespective of any changes to 450 itself, there's a strong desire by constituents to see us work with State Highway to ensure that pedestrian and bike crossings are improved. Currently, that's a bit of a taking your life into your own hands situation. Let's see, that was addressed. Oh, and I apologize, Mr. Minor. I don't remember if this was actually in the document, and I don't think you touched on it. Let's see. To what extent do we contemplate working with WMATA on Metro bus improvements and access? This is actually something that's come up a lot, specifically during the pandemic, and the questions that I'm getting are related specifically to what residents are not sure are either short-term or permanent changes to Metro bus routes in Bowie. And I apologize if I just missed something.
Okay, I covered the policy as it's written, and as I mentioned, it was fairly general in the way it was put together, and it didn't really respond to the needs that you're talking about. What we have done in the past is the city's had a chance to write letters concerning the Metro bus service in Bowie, and in fact, Metro themselves had done a study about how they could better serve the Bowie area, and this is probably 10 years ago, where they have a study where they have recommendations on restructuring the routes. Prince George's County is really the agency that implements transit in the county, and they sort of followed up on those recommendations from WMATA and included some of the recommendations in their long-range planning. And so it's a step-by-step process to really vie for the scarce resources that Prince George's County has to try to get the county to come in line with the recommendations of the route restructuring. And really, it's a fairly expensive proposition to do that. But essentially, the idea was that you would create several hubs within the city. For example, the Main Street area might be a hub, a transit hub. The Northview Drive Park and Ride lot might be a transit hub. You might have a transit hub in the Pointer Ridge Hall Road area. And you would have the routes, the bus routes running primarily from the Beltway areas out to those hubs. And then within the city, you would have routes that would serve the populated areas of the city on a more frequent basis, smaller buses. And so that's the essence of that plan. And as I've said, the city has constantly asked Prince George's County to take the lead on this. It is something that's in their long-range program. But again, it's a very expensive proposition to try to implement. If it were implemented, you would see a dramatic change in the way that transit is provided to our residents. It would be much more responsive. It would be much more frequent, but it would really change the way the routes are done today. So there is this solution in mind that's been identified. It's the price tag attached to it. And then, as I mentioned, also the city has a chance every year in writing our transportation letter to the county executive. And we've actually asked for the county to make additional changes, not to the WMATA system, but to the county's own system that it operates called the bus, that we have some recommendations for better serving our population. Our population is not really served by that system at the current time. And we feel that we're moving up the ladder in terms of priorities throughout the county as the county makes expansions to that system. We feel that a good candidate may be in the Bowie Town Center, Melford area to have a circulator type bus that would serve those employment and population centers. So there are things happening. Again, those are not necessarily development related policies. Those are policies that speak to the larger subject of transportation. And I hope that that's giving you some background that maybe you didn't have, or that your constituents didn't have. But you know, there are solutions out there that have been identified, but it's a real chore, a real task to try to get the funding that's necessary to make those things happen.
And I apologize, I actually cut out there for a moment. In spite of being a millennial, I seem to be having a lot of problems with Microsoft. The only other question, and thank you though, I'll revisit the video to make sure I get the full answer. The only other one, I'm pulling it back up here. Broadly speaking, when it comes to traffic management, I mean, it's not exactly a secret that Bowie residents have been across the city on residential city-owned roads concerned for years about speeding. I know my inbox is always full of emails about residents concerned about speeding. Some of it's a perception issue. We know that human beings are not very good at judging vehicle speed and tend to overestimate vehicle speeds. Some of it's solved when we actually put out the speed counters and find that people aren't going that fast. But in many cases, there is a lot of legitimate speeding on a lot of city-owned roads. And broadly speaking, and I know this is probably more of a conversation with Public Works specifically, and I know some work has begun on this, but I just wanted to plug it since it's relevant. I do think it's important for the City Council to continue the work of reviewing existing traffic management policies within city-controlled roads, so that we both, as item I think number 27 indicates, look at a broader panoply of alternatives for reducing speeds, including simple things like visual cues, painting white lines on roads to make the drivable portions of the road seem a little bit smaller as a cue to get people to slow down, but also just making it easier in the citizen petitioning process to actually get traffic calming measures put in place. Our current standards are very high, and that's something that I want us to continue to look at to make that a little bit easier. I'm certainly not suggesting that we would just want, 51% of a community to have to support traffic calming for it to happen, but probably a little bit lower than even our current standard would be not unreasonable, given the
Thank you so much. We'll be moving now to the council member from District 2. Before
the volume of complaints we get about this particular issue. Beyond that, I really appreciate your comments tonight, Mr. Meinert, and appreciate your time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Appreciate it. Mr. Meinert, thanks as always for your good work in this area. I have a number of questions here for you. I want to start with 197 to Maryland 3 and the history on that project and what the likelihood or potential is for anything actually coming of that proposal. Can you speak to a little bit to the history and if there's any chances of it actually being resurrected and implemented?
Councilman, I'm not sure I understand the road that you're looking for. Are you talking about Maryland 450 between 197 and Route 3?
I'm sorry, no, I'm speaking to item number 3, which is the proposed, the feasibility of a connector between somewhere near Bowie State and Route 3 in Anne Arundel County. Okay,
I'm with you now. So your question is whether it's feasible or whether it's
I know that there had been some. I know that there had been some discussions about this in the past and that it had fallen off because of concerns about wetlands and other, just logistical issues on access between those 2 points. Can you speak to that? Do you recall anything that's may have happened since then?
Well, we've tried to make the case to the county, Prince George's County, including the county council members and the county executive, that this should be a priority on the county's transportation priority list, so that it's really something that the state would need to endorse and take on because it involves 2 different counties. It involves the state regional roadway system. And so year after year, as you write your letter to the county executive and the state, we've reiterated the council's desire to have a feasibility study done and asking the state or asking Prince George's County to step up and take the lead in order to do that. That location is actually outside the city limits, and so it really would fall to the county, and we've encouraged the county year after year. And I don't know, we haven't really received any direct feedback. They're aware of this concern. We brought it up during the Bowie Mark Station sector plan, and it was something that the county felt that maybe the next master plan of transportation would might be the time to analyze that further. That project is just now being scoped out for a countywide plan to occur in the next couple of years. And so there is a possibility that it could come up. I don't know that it's been ruled out. I mean, there are a lot of environmental constraints, and obviously it would drive up the price of a road or the cost of building a road because of those constraints. But it really, I don't think has gone into the level of a feasibility study by anyone. But again, it would be above the city's level where that would have to be taken on as a project. So all we can do is encourage the state, encourage the county to take the lead on that. And so far they haven't.
All right, thank you. Next question I have for you is on item 6, which is an uninterrupted linear trail network, the one that would go into Anne Arundel County, where we have the need for a bridge over the river right near the racetrack. Has there been any thought put into expanding the trails now that we know what's going to happen with the racetrack property? Has there been any discussions with our friends at Park and Planning for perhaps a trail that would go from that general area, which would include where the new bridge is going to be, all along the river and those properties that I know the county owns a significant portion of, all the way down through to where the Jesuit property is?
Yes, I believe Park and Planning has a real strong interest in creating a trail system along the Patuxent River. And the bridge project, actually the bridge crossing project, I think is going out to bid this fall. So I think they're that close to actually getting it started for construction. So that will be a reality very soon. And I think once that connection's made between the counties, you're going to have a lot of actual traffic, bicycle traffic going between the counties. And certainly the development of the racetrack property as a recreational amenity over the next few years, when the city becomes the owner of the site, would have a draw. And obviously you'd be trying to connect down to the regional facility to be able to get people to and from the property. So I think that ties in very well with the Park and Planning goal to build a Patuxent River trail system, whether it's a boardwalk system or a water trail, what they call water trails. And I know that they're actually planning now to construct down in the Melford development. Park and Planning were deeded about 100 acres as part of the Melford project, and there has been a trail system designed through that area to connect from the US 50 area that I mentioned earlier, where hopefully someday there will be an underpass of Route 50, but that trail system will go up through the Park and Planning land heading up towards the Jesuit property. So I think exactly what you're talking about is the direction things are headed.
Can we put that on our priority list as something that we should have some ongoing conversations with? And seems like it's pretty close to a feasible project and something that would be of value to the community as well.
I also know that it's in the Trails Master Plan that we just did last year. Our consultant picked up on exactly those factors that you're describing, and there is a recommendation for a trail in there. So we can certainly mention it in the annual priority list of Park and Planning.
Great, thank you. Again, the next item I have a question on is the interchange at 197 and 301. And it gets to the question of how likely or how reasonable is it in today's times with the financial limitations that anything actually might come of that.
Well, that's exactly the issue is funding. In the study that was done, the project planning study for the interchange, it was pointed out that unless something is done at a certain point in time, the traffic congestion in the corridor is going to get so great that it may impact some of the businesses there in the Bowie Gateway, in the general area. People in the region are going to avoid coming through this part of the county because of the congestion being so bad. So there's an economic price to pay if that interchange system is not constructed. And really what we're talking about in that project is not only an interchange right there at Rips and Route 197, but also grade separating Harbor Way and Heritage Way as you're going north, so that the through traffic would just never mix with the local traffic, that you'd be able to get on both sides of 301 without ever having to get on 301. So it would benefit the local businesses. It would also benefit the travelers going through the area. But at the time the project was gone through project planning, and I don't recollect the date that we did that, probably 15 years ago or so, the price tag for that was something like $360 million, and that was back then. So clearly funding is the biggest constraint. I think everyone agreed on the design, everyone agreed on the objectives, everyone agreed on the necessity for having a project, but it's really a matter of at what point in time, at what point it does become so critical that the state would be willing to make that kind of investment.
The same thing applies to the intersection of Route 50 and 193. I know we have advocated for an intersection there to relieve, congestion on our roads. What is the state's current policy or thought on another interchange between 197 and the Beltway? My understanding was, last I heard, was that they were not interested in any further interchanges just because of traffic management issues. Are you aware of anything on that?
Well, I believe you're correct, Councilman. I think this recommendation to the cities has always been more of a hypothetical one, and really trying to make the case, as I mentioned, for keeping Route 197 between US 50 and 450, keeping that to 4 lanes. Because if you provide another safety valve for the traffic to exit Route 50, then as many people wouldn't be getting off at Route 197. And that was the case that the council was trying to make in defense of a 4-lane Route 197 by saying that there needed to be another interchange somewhere to the west of the city. And eventually the council supported one at Maryland 193. I don't believe there's any planning going on for that. I don't believe it's even in the state's highway needs inventory. So again, it's a council policy that was driven primarily by this concern about Route 450 being expanded to 6 lanes, which council had always been against. And so the rationale was that if there was another interchange on Route 50, that you could avoid having so much traffic coming up Route 197. So I think you're correct that it's kind of an ideal. It's something that we're trying to shoot for ultimately, but at this point I don't think there's any cooperation from the state.
My concern with this is if we are using, in effect, one of our asks for a project that is frankly a pipe dream and has no chance of coming to fruition, we may be losing some opportunity to advance other items that might be of more immediate or more likely development on our list. So I'd like us to consider that as we move forward. The next question is more on a status issue, 197. I know, as everybody does, that 197 between 50 and 450, it's been on again, off again, mostly off again. Can you provide a brief status on where we are with the return to the drawing table for 197 between those 2 points?
Right. Councilman, all I can say is that the State Highway Administration has a new project manager effective in January this year. Someone that we've dealt with in the past. I've had some conversations with that individual, and I know that they are actively engineering and trying to come up with solutions. And when they get to the 30% design plans, that they're intent on coming out to the community and showing the plans to the community and having, public input sessions. At this point, I don't know how soon that will be, that they'll be ready to do it. But that's the current status, and that would be the next step, would be to take it out to the public, whatever that concept is. And then if there's concurrence, then they'll move further into their design and hopefully try to finish it up.
Okay, thank you. I noticed on Route 3 at Sylvan and Route 3, we have a traffic light coming. And Forest Drive, the work continues there. Can you speak to where we are on those?
Honestly, I don't know, council member. We have a meeting scheduled with State Highway next week, and that's on the agenda to get an update from them, and we'll pass that on to you as soon as we get it.
Excellent. I also want to double down on the comments made earlier by my colleagues with regard to camera enforcement for, in particular, speeding within the community. And I think this is something that we're going to need to put on our priority list for working with the state legislature to see if we can get some additional authorities that we don't currently have to allow us to pursue additional traffic cameras so that we can address some of these local streets that have a perpetual speeding problem. So if you'd be so kind as to sharpen your pencil and perhaps work with our police department and others on the staff to start thinking about what we should be asking for specifically to help us in that area. That would be great.
Okay.
The next question I have is on the Patuxent policy. We spoke about that a little bit earlier. The Jesuit property, what can we do with suggestions or recommendations for use of at least portions of the Jesuit property as open space for either use by Park and Planning or ourselves or others? Can we look into what we could do on that?
Yes, that's a land use policy, and we did discuss a little bit of that at the last meeting. And certainly when the master plan comes forward, you will have an opportunity to make recommendations, not only on the land use, but on the suggested zoning. And I think I mentioned at the last meeting that the most effective way to achieve the preservation or the low density development would be to take that property out of what's called the established tier, which then has it develop only on well and septic systems at a very low density. And that really affects the character of what could be developed there. So I think the opportunities certainly are coming up through the master plan meetings and master plan position statements that you'll have a chance to take.
Okay. I'd love to talk with you further about that. The other, we mentioned Belt Woods. How about Nash Woods? I see there's nothing in here on Nash Woods in terms of ongoing protection for that area.
Well, it's not really in the same boat as the as the Belt Woods. The Belt Woods was threatened by development. Actually, a developer was going to develop part of property that has the old growth forest on it. This was probably 20 years ago, but it became the council's policy to support the preservation as well as prohibiting development that would impact the Belt Woods. So that was a very serious natural resource that was being threatened. Conversely, the Nash Woods, that property is located right at the northwest quadrant of US 50 and Route 3, and it really is a residual parcel, a wooded piece that was left over as the Kenilworth section of the city developed around it. And so essentially it's an isolated piece. It is now owned by Park and Planning, and all of it is owned by Park and Planning, so it's in public ownership and public stewardship. And so there really aren't any issues or needs for preservation of that property. It is being preserved.
Is there anything we can do to make use of it as park, with park and planning, that is to say, trails through there or other use?
I believe it is, Councilman, I believe it is managed by Park and Planning as a park, and there are informal trails throughout the property. I think there's some signs that have been posted, orientation signs. It's not a real active park because there's no parking lot or anything like that, so the public can walk into it. But it's never been suggested that anything happened in terms of active facilities or parking areas or things like that. But again, every year you have an opportunity to make comments on the park and planning budget. And if the city council wants to recommend something like active recreation on the parcel, it's certainly a community asset that's just sitting there. And certainly the woodland preservation was a primary objective on it. And so I don't know how much you'd want to affect clearing of the trees. There's also a lot of environmentally sensitive steep slopes and streams that run through that property. So I think the amount or the potential of any type of active facilities is pretty minimal, but it is an asset that really hasn't been examined or pushed, too much by anyone. So it's really the council's call if you want to continue to correspond with Park and Planning and make suggestions about it. Again, we have that opportunity every year.
Thank you. And one final question. EAC, can we run this through the EAC for specific comment and recommendation as well?
Yes, I did send it out to the EAC about 2 weeks ago when we knew we were moving ahead with this agenda. And as I mentioned, several EAC members did contribute to the last update in 2017. There's an EAC meeting this Wednesday night. I can certainly bring it up with the chairman and see if there's any additional input that they want to provide.
Great, thank you.
Hey, thank you, Councilman, staff, Joe Minor. We'd like to thank you so very much for your presentations this evening. We do appreciate you. And if you have any comments you'd like to make before we move on, please feel free.
I just mentioned that we'll be back again on the 19th of October to cover the final subjects, which is housing and neighborhoods, culture and historic preservation, as well as urban design. And also it would be an opportunity to do what I call a wrap up, which is if council members have questions that have occurred to you throughout these series of briefings, that would be the time to put those things out there. And then from that, staff will go back and create a draft document that we can put out for public review. As I described at the last meeting, we have a whole process that would follow. We'll draft a document, we'll put it out there for a 30-day public review. We'll take comments just like we did last time, package those up into a hearing draft, send all that information to you for a public hearing, and then we'll take your direction on how to proceed at that point. So I appreciate your time tonight and all of the input that you've provided, and it's going to help me to prepare a draft document. So I don't have anything else to add, Mayor.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Minor. We do appreciate it.
Good night.
Okay, good night. All right, we're moving on to item B under new business, the police department update. At this time, I'll turn it over to, I think it's Deputy Chief Preston will be presenting.
Nope, I'm here, Mayor.
Oh, okay, Chief, I didn't see. All right.
I'm actually in-house. Good, sir. How are you tonight? Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. We submitted a fairly detailed report. I'm just going to kind of touch on some of the highlights and then talk around some of the things, and then you guys are, of course, welcome for questions. We're going to start with staffing very quickly. We are, of course, authorized 67. We currently have 64 with one in the academy. We had two, but unfortunately he did not pass officer safety skills. and we currently have 3 on medical status. We also hired 2 new dispatchers, replaced our property custodian after Chaplain Hodge retired, and we replaced one of our records personnel. Going to page 1 of the report, looking at calls for service, we're on track to be about 1,600 calls higher than we were in 2019. Moving to page 2, if we look at our crime and citation statistics, the only thing that's going on the wrong direction is commercial burglaries. And unfortunately, we were part of a wider run that a group went through the county, kind of just terrorizing them and running the numbers up for everybody, unfortunately. But if you look at everything else, we're doing pretty well. Residential burglaries are down. Our theft from auto are way down, from 63 in 2019 to 27 currently, with a couple months to go. Robbery reports are down 50%. Our theft reports are down considerably. I'd like to take credit for all of that, but we didn't include COVID in our crime fighting strategy, but we will take the reductions nonetheless. If you look at our photo enforcement, they are down as well as our moving citations for a number of reasons. There's less cars on the road, and for a while when COVID was really hitting us, we suspended routine traffic enforcement to reduce the officers' exposure. Let's see, so we move on to page 4 with our CIS stats, or criminal investigations. If you look at the top, it'll explain the total numbers. The one we want to look at is crimes that were assigned. So you look at solvability factors before it gets assigned to an investigator. You need something to go on. If it's something that you have absolutely no evidence, nothing else, to even begin an investigation, it usually doesn't get assigned. So there's a total of 91 assigned. Out of those, 39 were closed with arrest. So they're about a 48% closure rate, which is very, very good in that line of work. A couple of the highlights that the investigators did. We had the first-degree cutting over at the Giant on Annapolis Road. That was a hate incident. They have very little to work on, except some video, and they were able to identify the suspect and charge him accordingly. We had a couple of theft from auto arrests back in January that they were out doing targeted enforcement, and we were able to close a couple theft from autos back in January. If we look at page 7, it's the community services team. And a lot of the time, with a lot of our events being closed because of COVID, has been spent working on some of the noise and complaints and, oh, thank you. Yeah, that helps. And looking at some of the nuisance abatement issues that we receive, people renting houses for parties, things like that. So we've been working very close with DPI, which is the Department of Permitting, Inspections and Enforcement, because it's not always a clear-cut, straight shot from law enforcement to a solution. And the community services team is very good about looking at it through a holistic approach. And you can see the great work that they're doing spread out over page 7 through 9. We also looked at our traffic safety officer and our unit. We call him a unit. He's really a unit of one, but he's on page 10. They combined with the folks from community services, they go out and hit the targeted complaints that we get from residents. And one of the things that we really like to do is keep track of where we are, what we're doing, and what our results are. So is it a true speeding problem or is it a perception problem? So again, working between enforcement and working with Public Works for traffic studies and volume studies, it does a lot to help mitigate those complaints. If you go back to the last page of your report, page 13, you'll look and see what our training section has been up to. They've been busy under very trying circumstances because the Training Commission doesn't care if there's COVID or not. We need to get our in-service in. We need to get our firearm training in. and the world doesn't completely stop. So they've been very flexible and have done a great job of keeping us on track for that. So in this world of COVID, some of the things that we're still trying to do with our outreach, we still have a drug take back on October 24th. That'll be done in a socially distant manner and a safe COVID manner. I've been continuing my chief chats. The last one I did, I've started taking policies and going through policies for the public. They're on our website, but sometimes it's a little much to ask them to go dig and look and read them. So we've been taking the highlights of the big ones. The one I did was use of force last. So we kind of went through our use of force process, some of our definitions, some of our highlights that people want to see. Do we have a duty to intervene statement? Do we, what is our force policy? Do we ban chokeholds? Yes, we do, except for under deadly force circumstances. So I'll continue that. We also going to try a ride with the chief and ride with the officers on November 8th, where we will be signing up a limited number of residents that will just go on a bike ride around Melford or something, just to get together. One of the things I didn't realize I was such a people person until they took all the people away. And one of the things I really, really love about this job is interacting with the community and seeing people face to face and building relationships. And it's a little tougher in this environment. So I'm really looking forward to November 8th getting out and spending some time with some people. One of the big things that we've been looking at and dealing with and navigating outside of COVID, of course, is the racial and social unrest that's going through the country. So last time we spoke, and we've spoken a number of times about policy, everything that people are asking about, especially under our use of force, is in our policy. But as I said before, we're being credited by CALEA. And so CALEA just pushed out some updates that reinforced some specific language and some stronger language around those sanctity of life, banning of chokeholds, things like that. So even though it was in there before, we emphasized it, and we just put some general updates in those policies. Along the lines of CALEA, we will find out on November 13th what our review said, and I don't have any reason to believe that we will not be certified beginning November 13th. All indications seem to be green lighted, and I'll be very surprised if we have anything but a positive outcome for that. Lastly, the last thing I want to touch on is our citizen review panel. It's been brought up a number of times. We were working on it. We've been spinning it around, trying to figure out the best way to do it. And ultimately, what we want is a fair, impartial, and outside review that is citizen-driven. We don't want the perception of a puppet panel or anything that we are unduly influencing. We want a true objective review of not just our use of force or our internal complaints, but just general topics, maybe a new policy. We have them look at policies. We want community input. We want true community input. And to that end, we've asked Elvita Dixon from the Diversity Committee and Dell Billings from the Public Safety Committee to take on this monumental task of putting form and function to this panel. We will be involved in an advisory standpoint only, but we really do want them to drive this. And I'm going to be quiet for a couple minutes and let Ms. Dixon and Mr. Billings add to the conversation about our review panel process.
All right, Ms. Dixon, would you like to go ahead first?
Okay, thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Chief Neske. And I just wanted to say that I talked with the committee members, and we fully support the establishment of the Citizens Review Panel. We are proposing that the city adopt a resolution to establish it, and we are ready to collaborate with the Public Safety Committee and the Police Department to set up the structure and the organization for this Citizens Review Panel.
we would be working on process and then making recommendations for, again, the structure of the panel, their authority, their responsibilities, how, who would be on the panel, how they would be chosen, length of term, whether or not they would be compensated. So a number of different areas where we would be able to make recommendations. And again, the Diversity Committee fully supports the establishment of this city citizens review panel, and we are asking the city to adopt a resolution to establish it so that we can work together to create this structure and make recommendations for it.
Hey, thank you, Ms. Dixon. We appreciate that. Dale, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, Chief and Deputy Chief. Thank you very much. I echo the comments that Ms. Dixon made a moment ago, and certainly the Public Safety Committee has been very intimately involved with the police department since actually before its formation, and certainly since the hiring of our first chief, Ms. Perez, back years ago now. We look forward to working on this project. We believe that it is something that will continue to enhance our police department to ensure that we have the best department in the area, in the country for that matter, and I think we're there already, so we're just going to try to make it better. Certainly, the more open we can be, the more beneficial that is going to be to our citizens. There are a couple of review panels. They change names a little bit, and we're going to look at some of those that already exist and take the best pieces of those that we can find and take the benefit of developing something that is honed to our citizens, that represents our citizens, so that we can ensure that this openness and this is a very viable process, so that we can continue the excellent relationship and the public relationship that our police department has with our citizenry, so that we can continue to make it stronger and to have this be a very good program for the citizens of Bowie.
Hey, well, I have to say thank you so very much to you, Ms. Dixon and Dell, for taking this on. And I'd like to thank the chief and the deputy chief for all that you're doing. As we've gone through this time of the challenges, and as we did our resolution earlier, talking about Black Lives Matter and those issues, when we start talking about that transparency and making sure that people feel comfortable, I think this is the right direction to do that. And Chief, Deputy Chief, and to all our officers and your staff, we appreciate all that you're doing. And we appreciate your opening the door wide open to make sure people understand that we do have that transparency here in Bowie, and that we are going to make sure that we continue to have the best police that any other county or municipality has. So I want to thank you for that. And again, I go back to you two, but also the committees, for being willing to step up and take on this. And we do appreciate that. And again, for probably the third time, Chief, Deputy Chief, all of our officers, all the staff, thank you so very much for what you do, and thank you for your transparency. And on that note, I'll ask if any other council members, starting with Henri Gardner, if you have any comments at this time. Okay, I'll move on to Council Member at Large, Ingrid Harrison.
No comments, just want to definitely piggyback on what you said, Mr. Mayor, and give kudos to our wonderful police chief and deputy police chief and all of our police officers. And thank you to Dell and Elvita for your hard work and what you do for the citizens of Bowie. I personally appreciate you both, and thanks for taking this initiative on. I look forward to working with you both on this.
Thank you. Councilman Esteve, District 1.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor. Chief, Deputy Chief, and team, I just want to say a huge thank you to you all for being here tonight. I read your complete report with interest. One thing that I love about our police department is that very often when there is an idea about how to further improve transparency or public communication, or ensure the department is working consistently in both in terms of racial equity and social justice, that 9 times out of 10, these ideas are not only already policy, but sometimes even already underway. And so I greatly appreciate the work that you continue to do on behalf of the city. I appreciate your continued work to ensuring that your department represents the demography of the city. And I very much continue to appreciate your continuing to set new standards in policing and continue to be a great example by which other departments can set their own policies. So thank you.
Thank you. Moving on to council member from District 2, DeFort Wolfson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. A couple of questions, but before I do that, I want to start off with a few words of gratitude again to the police force, all the work that you folks have been doing from the top to every corner of the organization. It has been a challenge. Everything starting with the COVID, all of the social issues and everything else. And I have seen nothing but consummate professional response to all manner of things. And I want to thank you. You've represented the city well for what is it now, 8 months through this crisis when it all began. And I know very well that you and your entire staff are out there day to day, face to face with people, which puts you at greater risk than everybody else. And we very much appreciate it. So thank you for job well done and continuing to be done. So thank you. The same goes for Elvita and Del. Thank you also both for being willing to bring yourselves and your committees to the table to continue to address the issues here. This is really I think a recipe for a great final recommendation, a great piece of work I'm sure will come out of this. So thank you. I'd like to also ask just a couple questions on the presentation earlier. Specifically, Chief, we had a point that you made that there were 91 assigned cases for the period so far, and you had the reports out. We had a close rate of 48%, which is great. The 91 cases, out of how many total potential cases was that?
So you had a total of 210. If you look above the CIS stats where you look at total assigned, total assigned cases, citizen contacts were 210. And so what a citizen contact is, we reach out, we try to get more information from the victim, look at solvability, and do we have anything that we can take a step closer and assign for a true investigation. So 210 was the number that you're looking for.
Excellent, thank you. The next thing is you mentioned briefly the nuisance issues we've been having with properties. I want to thank you for your methodical work on pursuing those. It is, as you say, labor intensive, and there are a lot of people involved, DPI among others. So I greatly appreciate your efforts, and again, the efforts of all the city staff. It's not just the police force, because I know that we also have our own code enforcement, and we have others that help support that. So that's very important for all of our citizens. We really have no room for that sort of problem in the city, and everything you're doing now, I think, will help eliminate the current problems, but hopefully will ward off future problems. And it will also, I think, set the tone at the county level that this is something that we're interested in pursuing and establishing those relationships with these other organizations that will make any future efforts to, tamp down future problems that much easier. So thank you in those endeavors. One question I still have that persists, which is I'm looking for a heat map of where we have criminal activity, whether it's nuisance type things that occur, or whether it's more meaningful problems. And I believe you told me that we were getting towards there, but not there yet. But don't worry, Councilman, we'll get you something. So I'm asking you, when can I get something?
We were close. The county was running preliminary data through some test models, and they hit some hiccups. And Bethany, our crime analysis, was working on some things. Then COVID came, then a brand new, beautiful young girl for Bethany came. So we will refresh that. So thank you for bringing that back up. I'll reach out and find out what the status is on the county side and our side.
All right, thank you.
Sure.
Hey, thank you. One quick question for you, Chief, and you can probably answer this. We look at the commercial burglary reports, and I see it's up. Is there an increase in the sophistication, or is it just more probably economic issues going on that we see that number increase?
I don't know if we can put it towards an economic reason, because a lot of them did start towards the beginning of the year, before COVID really became an issue. And it was just, you had a group that was their gig, and that was their specialty. So they kind of went up and down the 301 quarter and just kind of created havoc for a little bit.
Okay, thank you. Chief, I do want to first, and I'll say to my council members, thank you so very much as we've gone back and forth, particularly with the review board. But Chief, I want to thank you. I know we've had numerous conversations, and you know, that's the great thing about this city as well, that we all have an opportunity to talk. We present where we are, and the great part is that we've moved to a place where we can make sure that we address everybody's issues, concerns, and again, go back to that transparency and giving people that sense of safety that they all want. And again, I commend you, Chief. Like I said, I know we've had numerous conversations, and I commend the council as well for the conversations we've had, and I really look forward to the committees coming back with their recommendations and the continued support. So having said that, if there are no other comments, I'll say thank you again to Avita, to Bill, Del, to Chief and Deputy Chief, and we appreciate all you're doing.
Thank you, sir. If I could get one last comment in. There's been a lot of compliments to myself and Deputy Chief tonight, but you know, we are just fortunate that we have a staff that makes us look good. And I will say that I couldn't be prouder of the men and women of the department, both civilian and sworn side. We recently, through COVID, through the unrest, and then through a general election coming up, where we've been asked to cover voting boxes 24/7 at the senior center and at Bowie High School, and it's over 1,100 hours, man hours or woman hours, that we need to cover. And I got to say, in the midst of everything, our officers, you know, stood up, said, what do we need, and have pitched in and really gone above and beyond to make sure that the needs of the city are met. So all the compliments that we get definitely deserve and rain down on the officers that do make us look so good. And I'll leave it with that, and thank you for having us.
I echo your sentiments, Chief, and thank you again. All right, moving on to item C, the Bowie Golf Course discussion.
Good evening, Mayor. I wanted to provide a quick background before the council started their discussion for the benefit of the folks at home. The Bowie Golf Course has been owned by the city of Bowie since 1981. During that time, it has effectively been operated and managed by the same management company over those almost 40 years. In September of next year, that contract for management is going to be ending. The current owners of the management company that is operating the golf course is no longer going to be continuing with that. And while we have known that is going to be taking place, the city has been working towards evaluating next steps for the Bowie Golf Course. Last year, the city contracted with McDonald's and Sons. They're a specialist in golf courses to prepare a golf course renovation analysis of the Bowie Golf Course. The purpose of this was really to project and evaluate how to continue to provide the golf course as an amenity and really to set it up for long-term success. We took the results of that report and converted that into a capital improvement plan, which was included in the budget that we have for this year. Our capital improvement plan, of course, looks forward a number of years, and there are multiple phases in regards to taking those recommendations from McDonald's and Son and sort of stepping those out over the coming years in terms of those improvements. Coming up in the next budget that we have, we're hopeful that we can be in a position to be making a recommendation to the City Council in regards to the management of the golf course going forward, whether or not this is something that we're going to be looking for a new firm to be managing the golf course in the years to come and having a contract with that, or whether there will be need for the city to take a larger role ultimately in the operations of the golf course. So we will have more discussion on that coming up in the springtime, but we're well on our way towards those plans for having a successful conversion when this current contract expires in September of 2021. So I will leave it there and ultimately for the City Council's discussion on this item this evening.
Hey, thank you, Daniel. What I'd like to recommend, or my thoughts on it right now, is that we continue to know that we are in the middle of the pandemic. I think we want to continue to be fiscally responsible on all that we do. I would strongly think that we probably do like we have on other matters, kind of put off making any real decisions or anything, or deep discussions of how we go about and what we do, when we can better judge our fiscal position as we did with other items, and putting off any decisions that the staff or the city has to make until February. And I think that would be consistent with what we're trying to do. And again, it will give us a chance to really look at where we are when it comes to our CIP and funding and what we really want to do as we prioritize things, knowing that you will continue to do what you need to do to make sure that we're prepared. Having said that, what I'd like to do is start off with Councilman at-large Gardner, if he has any comments at this time. Hearing none, I'll move on to Councilwoman at-large Ingrid Harrison.
No, Mr. Mayor, we can have the discussion after we can further evaluate what our budget looks like sometime in February. It sounds reasonable to me.
Okay, thank you, Council Member Harrison. We'll move on to Council Member from District 1, Michael Esteve.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. So, and I apologize, I just want to be sure I'm clear. What I was going to suggest and what I thought we had some consensus for was having not a decision to be made, but rather scheduling a new Saturday retreat before next February, where staff could kind of bring us up to speed on the full extent of the city's recreation portfolio, as well as ongoing projects and stakeholder conversations. Is that something that my colleagues are open to?
I believe so. What we'll do is, Councilwoman Harris, looked like you wanted to speak. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wondered when, Councilmember Esteve, when you were looking to do something like that.
It may be easiest, and staff, feel welcome to chime in if this isn't the case. It may be easiest to do a council poll on this one, since two of our colleagues are not here tonight. But ideally, we would try to do this either late October or sometime in November if possible. I know schedules are tight. Everyone here works pretty hard. But if we could try to find some time in October, November, I feel like there's just a lot going on in the recreation community world right now, and we probably ought to take stock of the big picture.
I agree. No, sounds good to me.
Okay.
Well, Mr. Mayor, as far as timing goes, the sooner the better for us. If there'll be a retreat where there's a discussion that will impact how far we go with the golf club, or on whether we keep it, retain it, run it ourselves, the sooner the better, so we can plug that into our budget preparations in December, January timeframe.
Hey, thank you, City Manager, because that's what we had discussed a little earlier, and I believe that's a good point. The sooner the better. With that, Councilman Stev, any other comment or?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, question for staff. Mr. City Manager, given that two of our colleagues are convalescing this evening, are we able to do this in the form of a council poll?
Sure.
Electronically to pick a date?
Yes,
or do we pick a date tonight?
Well, we can get a poll. The poll would be whether the majority of the council wants to do a retreat, period, correct? And then we can pick a date, sure.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Or is there, so there's consensus right now that the retreat is something everybody wants to do, right? Okay, good, then we'll just pick a date. We'll work on a date and find a date for you, all right?
I'll make sure that everybody's fine with the retreat. I do believe so. I didn't hear any objections to that. So, having said that, I will move on, Michael, if that's okay, to our council member from District 2.
Nope, I'm all set. Thank you so much, Mr. Mayor.
All right, thank you. Council member DeFore from District 2.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to just remind everybody, I know, and I'll start off with a leading question because I don't remember the number. Mr. Mears, do you recall how much we paid for the course back in '81?
I do not recall. No.
Okay. I want to highlight that this is one of those rare instances where this amenity paid for itself over the years. This has been what I would call a lucrative endeavor for the city. We bought it, and the bonds were paid off through payments by the management company that was running the golf course. And subsequent to the completion of payment on those bonds, we received rent payments. So this has been really a win-win for the community, both fiscally as well as environmentally. We have a nice green space that is made great use of by our constituents. So I think this has been a tremendous asset to the community. And this is important. I know I've had a number of constituents that have raised this issue. They're very concerned about whether or not things are changing at the course, and I think obviously things will be changing for the better. I think there's a commitment on our part to improve that facility, and we need to figure out how we're going to do it. And I appreciate your good works in getting us there, meeting and discussing about it. I think it's a wonderful opportunity to do it sooner rather than later so that we can fold it into our budget planning for the coming year. I do know we will have, of course, proceeds from existing bonds that are out there that should be available to use on a number of CIP projects, and I think that this would be chief among them, certainly right after the improvements that need to be made to the ice arena, and I know that we need to move forward on that as well, once again for the same purpose, to ensure that we have those plans laid out for the budget. So I don't think we can afford to while away the time and deal with this too far in the future. We need to address it now and get this thing rolling and decide how we want to manage these things. So thank you all very much for your time and effort, and we'll keep this ball rolling.
Thank you, Councilman. And again, thank you to staff for preparing the information, the report. We do appreciate that, and we'll look forward to trying to get together and start coming up with some ideas of how we want to move forward. I think one of the biggest questions we have is how much we invest, how much we do. But those are things that we can discuss, and we'll be bringing back to the citizens as well as to what we're looking at trying to do. So having said that, there being no other questions, I'm not sure that there's anyone else who needed to comment. So at this point, I'd like to thank the city staff and everyone for your support. I want to thank everyone who presented this evening. City clerk, want to thank you as well as the the city attorney and others, and my fellow council members. At this time, I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, sorry, I couldn't get to the mute button quickly. Oh, are we adjourning or are we going to close session?
Well, we adjourn.
Closed session.
All right, would you like me
Would someone please make the motion?
to? Sure. I move that we adjourn and move to closed session. And read the statement to adjourn to closed session under the statutory authority of the Maryland Annotated Code, State Government Article, Section 3-305B1, to discuss the appointment, employment, assignment, promotion, discipline, demotion, compensation, removal, resignation, or performance evaluation of appointees, employees, or officials over whom this public body has jurisdiction, any other personnel matter that affects one or more specific individuals, in Section 3-305B7, to consult with counsel to obtain legal advice.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, the same favor? Hearing none. Thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Have a good night. We'll see you soon.
Good night.